And Mr. Barrows, I think, you know, he's had an interest, and he'll go on after to speak a few words after you get down here. So I want to welcome you all here and make sure you get some more coffee and cookies. So without further ado, Stanford, would you like to get up and kind of spread some of your knowledge?
10 minutes.
Would it be more comfortable if we had a chair here? You can just kind of wander around out in front of you.
Well, I was asked to give a short history of the railroad here, and in October of 1880, Richard Jenkins owned 428 acres of land between here and Barrows, and he asked the railroad to pay him $12,000. Well, the railroad refused. And a group of Dillon businessmen paid the $12,000. And that group was J.D. Morris and Howard Seagrave and C.Y. Reeder, Charles LaFrone, and B.F. White. They're old, early people here in Dillon. The first official pasture train arrived in Dillon on December 15th, 1880. With the coming of the railroad, there was several buildings that they built here. They built a 50,000-gallon water tank, a coal chute, stockyards, section houses, turntable to turn engines, an ice house, and a windmill to pump water for the water tank. The first railroad station at Dillon became too small, was outdated. The agency was transacting about $1,000 a day in 1907. The mayor, White, thought that they should build a new depot. He recommended that it be on the east side of the track. The first depot was on that side. The first depot was a small wooden structure west side of the track. Now, this depot was built in 1908, and it was formally opened with a New Year's party, a reception, and a dance. 1,000 people came to the party, and it was held here. Also, the governor, B.F. White, came. And at 10 p.m., the first dance was announced, waltzes and steps, and a waltz that wasn't played until the next morning. Supper was served by the ladies of the Catholic Church. The depot building was taken out of service in 1972 and was donated to the museum. And we're really thankful for that. May 1st, 1971 saw the last pasture train between Salt Lake City and Dillon. That's about it. Have you got any questions?
Stanford, you might kind of go over, you might want to explain your personal relationship there that what you did, I think this would be very interesting for people to know, and you probably don't want to talk about yourself, but if you, I find it was very interesting.
My dad was a roundhouse foreman at Lima, Montana. And they had a 7-stall roundhouse up there for steam engines and a turntable. When I was 17 years old, I decided I'd had enough education and wanted to quit school. Well, my dad said, if you're going to quit school, I think you better, he said, they're hiring brakeman conductors. So I hired out on the railroad when I was 17 years old. And I made my first trip from Lima to Dillon. At that time, we had the 16-hour law and the steam engines, and quite often you were 16 hours on duty because you had to take water and coal about every 25 miles or less, and it was a long journey. So I stayed with the railroad all my life, as I say, and we moved to Pocatello in the 50s, and I worked out of there for about 3 or 4 different directions as a conductor, on freight trains, and some passenger trains, until I retired in 1989. That's about all my history with the railroad. So if you got any questions, the town of Lima ought to be real proud that they've got this depot, because the Union Pacific was the first thing they would do when they quit using it. They wanted to tear it down, and they did tear it down. They had a beautiful depot in Lima, so they asked the mayor and some people if they'd like to have that depot. No, we don't want it. So the next morning, a fellow came there with a great big bulldozer and tore it down and burned it up. Well, right now, I bet they would like to have that depot. They had a beautiful depot in Idaho Falls, and that's gone. But they did say the depot at Blackfoot, and they made a museum out of there for potatoes. Idaho russet potatoes. But as a general rule, there's no depots left anywhere. They just demolished them. That's the way it was. And I want to thank you people for asking me to be here. I can answer your questions.
And you'll be around afterwards if
Okay,
you can ask some
fine.
personal questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the time, Mr. Empey. I'd like to introduce Mr. John Barrows, who you've been here a while, you know him, and you've seen some of his writings. So, Mr. Barrows, if you give some kind of a little background that you had too, before you.
Okay, before we start, I was 2 years in the future when he started railroading, and I wasn't even around yet. But I started railroading when I was 17 also, and worked on what they call a bridge and building crew on the Northern Pacific. And worked one summer there and decided there had to be something better else. And I learned to telegraph, Morse telegraph, worked on the Northern Pacific, but because I could telegraph, they frequently put me down on the Butte line, and particularly at Butte and Silverbow, which were joint agencies with the Union Pacific. So we worked with Paul Bedecker and Frank Roy, and earlier John Schaffner and Mr. Bob Dartner, who was early agent here, on the telegraph with the messages for the trains. And later I graduated from college might remember, that had all the packages, and worked for that for a couple of years, and then decided to become a newspaper person, and spent 42 years doing that. Dillon has a very special place in Montana. This was the first real railroad town, the first end of track. It came to Monida and came down into Dillon with a portable town called Terminus. And wherever the end of track was, that was Terminus. And as Mr. Empey pointed out, Dillon grew up around the railroad. In fact, it was the businesses that come in with Terminus that actually formed the town. And many of the buildings were temporary. The Korean Hotel, which is about the location of the Metlin, was a portable hotel. They had canvas roofs, they had board sides, and would push right up. And it stayed until 1897 when the Metlin was formed. It was, at that time, a real premier hotel. Dillon was a railroad town. It was also a mining town, a cattle town, a horse town, a sheep town, a trading town. In 1881, the next spring after the railroad got here, there were 2 million pounds of freight sitting on the ground, waiting for horse and wagon to take them up to Helena and Butte City and Bozeman and Missoula. This was the only real railroad point in Montana for 2 years until the Northern Pacific was completed in 1883. Now this was the Utah and Northern Narrow Gauge Railway when this was built. 3 foot wide, a slim princess, iron ponies and men of steel, handbrakes, bitter cold, short trains through the Beaver Canyon. The little narrow gauge trains wended their way, and it was Dillon that was the end of track. And the next year they completed it up in the Silver Bowl and eventually to Garrison, where the interstate splits off. And it was there that the Utah Northern met the Northern Pacific at the final spike ceremony. And many of the people of Dillon went up on that train to welcome the Northern Pacific, the Transcontinental, and were highly irate because nobody fed them, and they had a special trade, and they got delayed, and the editor of the paper, Hiram Brundage, who came right after the railroad, the Dillon Tribune, he was highly irate at how shabbily the Northern Pacific had treated the folks from Dillon. But the town continued to grow. Dillon had many important features to it as related to the railroad. The hay and the crops from the big hole. Armstead and was also a spot where they loaded a lot of horses. And most of the horse cavalries of Europe, when they entered World War I, we still had horse cavalries. And most of those horses came from Horse Prairie, the Big Hole. This was the #1 cavalry horse buying station for Europe, basically. There was also primary sheep loading here, and wool with big warehouse. This was a major wool and this major sheep country, major cattle country, major mining country, and it was a lucrative place for the railroad, and the railroad gave sustenance to Dillon. So the two had symbiotic relationship. this steeple was built arts and crafts style. Benjamin Franklin White, the last territorial governor of Montana, mayor, longtime mayor of the town, head of the bank, put some pressure on the Union Pacific, and they built this wonderful structure. In December 31st, 1908, they dedicated it as Mr. Empey said. And ever since, it had been, for the next 70 years almost, it was a headquarters of the community. It was here that you went to Butte to get drafted. And it was from Butte back down that you went to basic. It was here in 1898 that the boys of Company E, 1st Montana Volunteers, boarded to head for the Philippines. And it was a year later that they came back. And it was en route to Butte, but Dillon commandeered the train. It was supposed to stay here for 30 minutes. They were here for over 12 hours. Butte wound up in welcoming their boys at 2 in the morning. They were highly irate, stealing their thunder. It was here that the boys went off to the First World War. The same with the Second World War. It was here that women of the town ran a canteen for the soldiers coming through. It was here that was the Western Union office, right where the diorama is. And it was there that the messengers of the dead and wounded came into the families, to the Blue Star families. From the beginning, right up to today, the Union Pacific has been a partner with Dillon, and Dillon has been a partner with the Union Pacific. They have been generous, they have been conscientious, and although there are no longer any passenger trains, the importance to Dillon, Beaver County, and Montana of the Union Pacific, and their commitment to opening and keeping this line open. So coming down from Helen this morning, I saw 3 crews out working on the tracks. This is a good sign, and it's a sign of a good neighbor, and Dillon has been a good neighbor to the railroad. I welcome you here, and I'm very pleased to have been asked at this ceremony. And thank you, Mayor, and thank you for your talk. Appreciate it.
Mr. Barrows.
Okay, this is what we've been waiting for. Very interesting talk. Dan, Arbeck? Sure. You guys probably have a few things, and I want to thank Union Pacific for partnering up.
Sure, glad to do it. Well, thank you, everyone. It's a delight for me to be here again. My name is Dan Arbeck. I serve as Director of Public Affairs with Union Pacific Railroad. I office in Salt Lake City, but work across Utah, Idaho, and Montana. I've been with the company 9 years, started in Omaha, and moved here about 5 years ago. And so I've been coming up to Dillon in western Montana, southwestern Montana for the last 5 years. And I grew up in North Dakota, Minnesota, so being north is good for me. It's in my blood. Stanford, thank you for your comments. John as well. For those of you who maybe we heard about the history of the railroad here in Dillon. Many of you grew up with it. It's here. It's literally in your backyard. But some may have forgotten, or maybe don't know, that Union Pacific today is the nation's largest freight railroad. We're headquartered in Omaha, Nebraska. We operate in 23 states, 2/3 in the western United States, 46,000 employees. We're hiring again, 33,000 miles of track in terms of what we operate. And just last year, we celebrated our 150th anniversary. We heard a lot of dates today. When you think about Union Pacific, it was July 1, 1862, that Abraham Lincoln signed the Pacific Rail Act, creating Union Pacific. And so last year we did a number of events celebrating our 150th. And one of those things that we wanted to do was, you think about all the communities. Today, Union Pacific alone, we operate in over 7,000 communities. I don't want to know who counted all those up and had figured that out, but 7,000 plus communities Union Pacific alone operates in. And Dillon is a good example of how these communities grew up with Union Pacific over that period of time. And so as we had our 150th anniversary, the question was, how do we recognize not only our history as a company, but the history in the communities where we have operated and continue to operate today? And one of those things that we created last year and we wanted to carry forward well beyond the 150th is what we call Train Town USA. You all know you're a train town, but this is a formal way to acknowledge and recognize that. In a personal sense, I grew up in a small town in Minnesota, and Wheaton, Minnesota. When you came to Wheaton, it said, "Welcome to Wheaton," and on the signboard there was, Rotary Club and Lions Club and Kiwanis, and Tree Town USA, state football champs, 1987. And it was kind of those signature pieces, the signature piece of history for that city. And even driving here to Dillon today, you see that when you enter Dillon. You see the history and what those signature pieces are. And so this is something we hope can match that. We hope that you can affix somewhere in your community to let those who either are from here or those visiting, that we acknowledge and celebrate the history of Union Pacific here in the city of Dillon. And so I'd like to ask the mayor to join me. We'd like to formally present and recognize, and actually before I do, I mentioned this to the mayor earlier, we have a proclamation which is in the mail, signed from our chairman, and it's much more grand than the piece of paper I'm about to read. I'd like to read what that proclamation says. Know all citizens by these presents, the Union Pacific Railroad was established when the 16th President of the United States of America, Abraham Lincoln, signed the Pacific Railroad Act on the first day of July in the year 1862. Whereas the city of Dillon was established in the year 1885, and whereas the city of Dillon is located near or on the railroad named Union Pacific. Be it therefore resolved, the Union Pacific Railroad recognizes the city of Dillon as a place of historical significance to the railroad. Here too, Union Pacific Railroad does grant the city of Dillon the title of Train Town USA to have and to hold by means of the signing of this proclamation. In consideration of the above, the Union Pacific Railroad wishes to bestow congratulations to the city of Dillon on this noteworthy milestone, the first, I would add, in the state of Montana, on this first day of July in the year 2012. And so this is something that we started last year, want to carry forward, and that is from our chairman, Jim Young. And so that is forthcoming, and we'd be excited for you to have that. But if we could, unveil Dillon as a Train Town USA. I've got one more little surprise for the city and the mayor. Something we started last year as well, and we wanted to carry forward is, and I mentioned earlier how I've had the great privilege of coming here the last 5 years, and I'll tell you, we've done a number of things. We've supported programs for students. We've worked with Paul and the police department here. We supported a bike safety program years ago when I first moved to the areas that are coming up here. And so we've tried to find ways to be involved in the community, whether it's through sponsorships, whether it's through our foundation giving and nonprofit support. You think about the YMCA up the street. Many of our employees use that facility, and how we can put some of the programs for youth. And so not only do we want to recognize Dillon as a train town, there's the overall sense of partnership that we've heard the history of, but the sense of partnership that we hope continues. And so something last year that we created was a partner coin in this box here, and I'll lift it up just a touch, and it's certainly welcome to see it afterwards, but there's a coin here, and there's 3 distinct rings in the coin. On the outer side of the coin, what you'll see, and it's two-sided, on the outer side, on the outer ring of the coin, are 2 locomotives, one a steam and the other a diesel, coming together to signify where we were and where we're going in our history. On the center ring, you think about that Pacific Railroad Act signed by Lincoln, some of the language from that act is on the second ring. And in the middle, on one side, is an image of the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, and then on the other side is the Union Pacific Shield. And so this is something that we wanted to present to the city as well in terms of the great partnership that we've had and that we hope continues into the future. So Mayor, I wanted to present you a partner coin on behalf of the Union Pacific Railroad.
Well, thank you very much.
Delighted. And so we hope you'll find a place of prominence to have this year in town to fix it, to let your folks know, let visitors know that how proud we are of our history here in Dillon and Montana. And thank you all for coming. This is a delight, I know, for Union Pacific and hopefully here for the city as well. So thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor.
Please feel free to have the coffee, lemonade, and cookies. And if you think you're gonna be hungry later on, put something in your pocket.
In other words, you want to get rid of them.
No, don't.
We take them down to City Hall.
Oh.
Disappear really fast. Thank you for coming, I think we really appreciate it. And again, Dan, we really appreciate all of the Union Pacific has done for us, and we're continuing to have a good relationship. And I told you a few stories about how I was impressed with some of your people coming through, and so it's really a pleasure. The main thing is if it hadn't been for the railroad, we wouldn't be here. This town would not exist.
The namesake.
Other than I do have a complaint is, I wish they'd have lined up the railroad exactly north and south because it really screws up the street. But that's the first thing.
Give us another hard time.
So. Thanks.